Hey everyone. So one thing you should know about me is that I grew up, well, I say I grew up, I lived in Alabama for half my life, and I went to a Christian school while I lived in Alabama. Um, my mom put me in a Christian school, and this Christian school had typical rules for a Christian school. It had a modest dress code. At one point, we had a school uniform. We had um, no profanity or offensive languages on our T-shirts, things like that. But there was one rule at the school that I didn't understand at the time, but I understand it now that I'm older, now that I'm grown up. Um, so we were never allowed to say the words "shut up" to another student. We were never allowed to say the word "shut up" to another student. Um, we um, we were always required to speak respectfully to other students. And we thought that they were treating the word shut up just like any other curse word. We thought that they just didn't want us to say it, that it was just a bad word. And so we would try to find ways around it, right? Some of the students originally said, well, if we can't say shut up, then we'll just reverse the word order. We'll tell people to upshut, and they will get the message. And the teachers didn't like that. It turns out the teachers don't like when you try to find loopholes to get around their rules, right? So we started telling people to be quiet after that. Teachers didn't like that either. And so eventually we tried several other things when we wanted people to be quiet. And quite frankly, I thought there were some students who would be better off if they didn't talk. I know there are some people who kind of understand what I'm getting at, the really annoying students in school. And this is the mind of a 15, 16, 17-year-old guy, right? Um, so anyway, we weren't allowed to tell people to shut up. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I do now. It's not about that particular phrase. It's about learning to control what we say. It's about learning to control our tongues. And that's the message that James gives us in James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. James says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will face stricter judgment. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is mature, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths if we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire! And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of life, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature, can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse people made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes a blessing and a curse. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. So James is making a point here, and he starts out by addressing his audience. He's addressing this specifically to teachers. Now, it was likely there were some people who wanted to be teachers in the congregation that he was writing to, and James isn't saying that you shouldn't become a teacher in the church, but the point that he seems to be getting at is that you should weigh it very carefully because you're going to be judged more strictly. You should know what you're getting yourself into. And the fact is that we all make many mistakes. Then he goes into this general principle that's applicable to the church as a whole. Okay, so even though James is intending this message primarily for teachers, the principle is applicable to everyone. So James argues that anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is mature, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. So James is essentially arguing that taming the tongue is incredibly difficult for us to do, but is important. That's his thesis here. He writes, if we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Now, one of the things I like to do from time to time is watch animal videos. I actually saw a video, I've seen videos of dolphins jumping through hoops at SeaWorld and bouncing a ball and all of that. But one of the things that amazed me was I saw this video where someone had trained their dog to communicate with them by pressing buttons. Each button said a different word. There were like 20 or 30 buttons on the ground, right, that this dog could choose from. And so when the dog wanted to go out for a walk, it pressed one button. If it wanted to go get some food, it pressed another button. If it wanted outside, it pressed another button. It was just fascinating. So the idea here is that we make horses obey us by putting bits in their mouths. It is easier to train an animal. What James is saying here, and this comes in at verse 7 too, but James is saying that it's easier to train an animal to do something like that than it is to tame the human tongue. That's how much effort it takes to tame what we say. And James goes on and says, or look at ships. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So James here is saying that a small rudder directs the entire ship, and our words can impact other people. Now, I'm not teaching this prosperity gospel, name it and claim it stuff. I don't believe that's biblical. What James is basically saying here, though, is that our words affect other people in the sense that we can build them up or tear them down. We can cause harm to them, or we can help them. And he makes this point clear in verse 5. He says, so also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. So just like the rudder is small and the bit that's in the horse's mouth, by the way, that's intentional. James is intentionally using the analogy of something that's put in the horse's mouth to control the horse. James is saying, just like those things are small, but they direct something mighty and bigger than a human, so also our tongue. It's important to control our tongue. He goes on to say, how great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of life, and is itself set on fire by hell. So James compares our tongue to a fire. Our tongue can be just as destructive as a fire. I looked up the statistics for this, and I don't have this in front of me. I did have the statistics in front of me whenever I preached a sermon on this, but I actually looked up the statistics for wildfires in 2022, and it was recent. I think the numbers came out in November that I looked at. But it's amazing that there were so many fires, of the human-started fires, of the wildfires that were human in origin. There were several things that were the cause of these fires. Things like unattended campfires and cigarette butts being thrown out were among the top reasons, or the top reasons why there were these wildfires, the human-caused wildfires. It's fascinating that such a small thing can cause so much destruction. And that's what James says our tongue can do. James says, for every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. Again, this goes back to the idea that I mentioned a minute ago, that we can train dogs to communicate with us by pressing buttons. We can train dolphins at SeaWorld, but it's harder than that to control our tongue, to train ourselves in what we think. And James wraps up by saying, with it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse people made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes a blessing and a curse. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. So James is saying, hey, you're praising God with on one hand, and then you're hurting people with what you say on the other. You're tearing people down on the other hand. And this isn't to say that there's never a time for a harsh conversation. That's not what James is saying. James isn't saying that we need to go around just affirming everything about everyone. That's not what James is saying. What James is saying is that we shouldn't intentionally try to tear someone down or seek their destruction by what we say. That's not something that we should do as Christians, especially when we go to praise God on Sunday, but we gossip and we tear people down throughout the rest of the week. He closes by saying, does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. So, what James is saying here is, and James understands a principle. Let me get to that. Let me just get to the principle. James understands a principle. The principle is this: what we say is a reflection of what's in our heart. What we say is a reflection of what's in our heart. And so, um, when we tear down other people, that's a reflection of what our heart, where the state of our heart, where our heart is. And so, it's important that we honor God with what we say. Why is this important? Let me just get to that. Why is this message important? Because I think we live in a period of time where we're more divided than ever. We're more divided than ever. Everyone's yelling at each other. Everyone's screaming at each other. And I just want to offer a reminder that we have to imitate Christ not only in our actions, but in our words as well. We can't get in the middle of everything and sling mud with everyone else. We have to honor Christ with what we say. And so I just want this to be a reminder that what we say is important and that we have to be incredibly careful that we're modeling Christ whenever we speak.